Sin has always been man's greatest problem. And from the very beginning, one of the elements of sin that makes it so incredibly dangerous is its deceptive nature. Its deceptive nature. How that the serpent beguiled or deceived Eve. In Genesis chapter 3 and verse 13. Romans 7 and verse 11, Paul describes it this way, that sin, taking occasion through the commandment, and through it deceived me, and it killed me. It promises pleasure, and sin is pleasurable, but it's momentary passing in its nature. Hebrews 11 and verse 25. And so the old statement goes with sin that it thrills. There's a thrilling moment. You get that height of ecstasy, but then it kills, followed by the lowest of lows. And so the thrilling moment is followed by the moment that kills us. And that's why the Bible says that we have to exhort or encourage one another, lest any of us become hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. Gareth Reese, a Christian church educator, put it this way. He said, sin cuts the optic nerve out of the soul. That is, it slowly deadens your feeling to sin. Our conscience is there, and our conscience, the relationship of a Christian and their conscience is kind of it's a long, drawn-out discussion, one we can't have fully right now. But your conscience is a good thing to the degree that you train it the right way. But what sin does with a conscience that is trained the right way is it slowly but surely begins to erode it to where there's no more feeling there. Okay? I remember on one occasion, one of the houses we were living in, I needed to cut a transition strip. We had put in tile in the kitchen and in the dining room, and we still had carpet in the living room, so I needed a transition strip cut. And it was made out of some kind of a metal. I don't remember exactly, but I didn't have the tool to cut it, so I took it over to a man's house where he could cut it. And he handed it back to me. Now, this is a man who had worked with his hands all of his life. He handled it, no problem. He handed it back to me on the end where he had cut it. And I grabbed it, and, well, let's be real. My hands are not the hands of a man who's done hard labor out in a field. My hands are the hands of a man that sits in an office. And so when I grabbed the end of that thing, I was in for a shock. Because to me, that thing was hot. Because I had hands that weren't hardened. His hands had been hardened through years of work to where he could grab it and he could not feel it. But my hands, because they had not seen that type of work and labor and toughness that had been put on it, I could feel it. You see, what sin does is it takes us from a sensitivity toward sin, and it slowly erodes us to where when we touch sin, it no longer has an effect. You can't feel it anymore. That's what the Bible means when it talks about the conscience being hardened. To where things that would have bothered us no longer bother us. And that's what sin does, and that's what Reese is talking about when he says it cuts the optic nerve out of the soul. So there's another old statement about sin that I want us to examine together this morning as we think about sin's deceitfulness. And I'm not really sure who originated it, but it is deadly accurate. The statement goes like this: sin will take you further than you want to go. Sin will keep you longer than you want to stay. And sin will cost you more than you want to pay. Sin will take you further than you want to go. It will keep you longer than you want to stay and cost you more than you want to pay. So this morning, as we think about this principle, I want us to turn our attention to 2 Samuel 11. 2 Samuel 11 with David and his adulterous relationship with Bathsheba, followed by murder and a number of different sins by which he became complicit. And think about how this principle plays out, okay? So let's begin under this first premise of sin will take you further than you want to go. That is, it starts here, but where sin starts and where sin ends, there's many times a big distance between the two. And it leaves people wondering, how in the world did I go from here to here? So in this, first of all, we see David, and he's up on his housetop, and he's doing nothing wrong. It says in chapter 11 and verse 1, in the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. And they ravaged the Ammonites, and they besieged Rabbah, which is the capital of Ammon. But David remained at Jerusalem. We're not told why. But the narrator does see that it's important, and so perhaps he should have been at war. It says, it happened late one afternoon that David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house. Now, it was customary in that time, especially in that culture with the heat problems, that they would take a nap or at least not work during the hottest hours of the day. So they would go home and kind of rest, and it wasn't uncommon to take a nap, and then you get up and you go about it. So it seems like David has done that. He's been at home and perhaps been sleeping, and then he gets up and then he starts walking on the king's rooftop, which is nothing more than us going out to our back porch. It's just more of a city structure. A city way of looking at it. So, it says that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. Now, what we have to understand is that David has done nothing wrong up to this point. He didn't go up on that rooftop looking for her. He went up on that rooftop like every other day. Let's also make it equally clear, the way this story is told, Bathsheba has done nothing wrong. She is doing exactly what she should have done. She's purifying herself from her uncleanness, as it will be called here in just a moment. She's done nothing wrong. The way the narrator presents us this text, the one who carries the greatest weight of responsibility here is David. Now, Bathsheba, she consents to that relationship, but you also get into a lot of deeper things, which we don't have the time to, even though I'm still dabbling at it. There's also the very real idea that this could be considered rape, what takes place. Because David is using his position of authority to so-called impose his will upon a subject in his kingdom. There's a very strong case that can be made one way or the other, okay? But many times when we study this story, people are like, well, Bathsheba didn't do anything wrong. She was taking a bath where she always took a bath. Her house was smaller than David's, and David's was higher up on the mount, and he could see down into. But even if David is walking around, and he happens to see that, David still hasn't done anything wrong. Why? You can't control what comes into your line of sight, any more than you and I could walk down the street today, and somebody could burst out doing the same thing, and what control would we have over it? None. What wrong would we do? None. But this is where it begins to become a problem. Verse 3, and David sent and inquired about the woman. Now he's lusting, he's looking too long. Now he's inquiring about, I wonder if she would be interested in a relationship, if you can even dare call it a relationship. And so he sends and inquires after her. And one said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, one of David's mighty men, a close friend? And so here's the thing. When David heard these words, she's the wife of another man, immediately he should have done what? Stopped his inquiry. But he doesn't. And so now, I want you to pay attention how matter-of-factly and succinctly this relationship is described. In verse 4, now it moves to their adulterous relationship with one another. So David sent messengers, and he took her, and she came to him, he lay with her, then she returned to her house. That's simple. Look how quickly it passes over what they think is going to be just a one-time thing. So David is up here, and he's walking around innocently on his roof, and he sees something over which he has no control, but what he did have control over was looking too long. When he saw it, he should have turned away. But now he's looking, and now he's inquiring, and now he's taking a woman who is not his wife, and he's committing adultery with her. But then it's only going to get worse for him. The sin is going to continue to pile up. because then he begins to lie. Now she returns to her house, and then she conceives and sends a word to him that says, I'm pregnant, which is not surprising based upon the statement about purifying herself from her uncleanness. Verse 6, so David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. And when Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was doing and how the war was going. And David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went to the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house, and all the servants of the Lord, and wouldn't go down into his house. When they told David Uriah did not go down to the house, David said to Uriah, have you not come from a long journey? Why do you not go to your house? Uriah says to David, the ark of Israel and Judah dwells in booths. It's out at war in the tent. And my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I go to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? The other soldiers aren't getting these freedoms. Why should I get them? But what is David doing? He's lying. Why does he send Uriah home? How does he present himself to Uriah? Tell me how things are going in war. He doesn't care how the war is going. What he cares about is creating a situation where he has deniable plausibility or plausible deniability. If he can go home and he can be with his wife, then people will assume, everyone else will assume that the pregnancy that has resulted is everything is above board. But that didn't work, because Uriah was a man who was extremely honorable. And David, in his right mind, would have honored Uriah for being so honorable. But now, he's going to take it a step further. Let's get him drunk and see if we can get him down to his wife's house. Then David said to Uriah, remain here today also, and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem the next day, and David invited him, and he ate in his presence and drank, so that he made him drunk. And in the evening he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of his Lord, but he didn't go down to his house. So now, let's add another sin on top. Let's get him drunk. We get him drunk in his inebriation, he'll go home, he'll be with his wife. Problem solved. Only problem, it wasn't solved. So now, he's going to add to this list of sins. Now he's going to be involved in conspiracy to commit murder. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter, he wrote, set Uriah in the forefront in the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die. Look, it started with a nap and getting up and taking a walk, and now he's ordering the execution of one of his most faithful men. In 2 Samuel 23, when he lists David's mighty men, Uriah the Hittite is there. He is one of his most faithful companions and soldiers who has most likely been with David, not since he's just been king, but also since he's been in the wilderness running from Saul. And the development of the mighty men come into play. One look that lasted too long, and now we're killing a man that we would trust our lives to. And then he commits the murder. Joab was besieging the city, and he assigned Uriah the place where he knew there were valiant men. And the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the servants of David among the people fell. And Uriah the Hittite also died. Josephus says that Uriah died rescuing men who had been wounded. So now he's murdered him. And people say, well, he didn't technically do it. Yes, he did. Any court of law, he'd be guilty of murder. And furthermore, even if no court of law would convict him of murder, God did. Because in 2 Samuel chapter 12, when he sends Nathan to confront David, he says, you struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword. You did it. You're responsible for killing him. And so now David, what started as a casual stroll with a look that lasted too long, he's been lusting, he acted upon his lust, and he committed adultery, And then he starts lying to cover it up. He gets someone drunk in order to cover it up. He concocts this conspiracy to kill his friend, and then he kills him. Sin will take you further than you want to go. Number 2, sin will keep you longer than you want to stay. Right? David thought this was a one-time thing. What our culture would simply call no big deal. It's a one-night stand. It is a big deal. It doesn't matter if adultery is committed one time or 15 times or 200 times. It's always adultery, and it is always sinful. But David thought it's going to be a one-time thing, and I'm going to kick it. It's never going to happen again. And I can't tell you how many stories I have heard from reading and from going through different things in counseling seminars and from other things for people that I have dealt with. It was just going to be a one-time thing. It was going to be innocent, and it turned into this full-blown thing. He thought that it was just one thing, and it turned out to be a whole lot more. What David found out, and what we have all found out, is that sometimes when we're done with sin, I'm done with that. I don't want to think about that anymore. I don't want to do any more with that. Sin may not be done with us. You see, that's the fine print that Satan puts with sin. Get your cheap thrill, but I'm going to hide from you in fine print all of the the problems that are going to echo down through the days that follow you. Now you're going to have to live with this. You see, he was done with Bathsheba, but now Bathsheba's pregnant, and now he can't be done with Bathsheba. He was done with Bathsheba, but now he's killed her husband and he's married her for himself. He was done with Bathsheba, but what we're going to see in just a minute is now the rest of his life he would pay for this one sin for the rest of his life, and his family would pay for this one sin for the rest of his life. Again, the Hebrew narrator is trying to show us how David thought about this. It was simple. It was transactional. He sent, he took, she came, he lay, she returned, story over. It's modern-day American hookup culture. That's what it is. But when he thought he had closed the door to sin, sin came and opened that door again and said, but now there's a child, and now there's a dead husband, and now there's a marriage, and now I'm going to eat your family up from the inside and spit them out. And that then brings us to the third idea. Sin will cost you more than you want to pay. When Nathan confronts David, David says, you remember he tells him the parable of the ewe lamb, and David says, the man who has done this thing shall surely die because he had no pity, but he'll also restore the lamb fourfold, the ewe lamb that had been stolen and murdered, which of course was David in the whole context. And so there are 4 punishments that are mentioned in this text from Nathan. And chapter 12 in verse 10, he says this, now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house. Your family will always be in turmoil. There will always be war and infighting. Number 2, I will raise up evil from your own house. You used to have to just worry about enemies without. Now you're going to have them within, and 2 sons are going to try and kill him and overthrow him. You did this in darkness. I'm going to take your wives and give them to another man, and he's going to commit adultery with him before other people on the housetop of this very house where you stole another man's wife. And that other man was his son. Then he said, and the child that has been born to you in Bathsheba, he's going to die. Nevertheless, because you did this deed and you have utterly scorned the Lord, the child who is born to you shall die. And he does. Think about the fourfold punishment again. It cost David 4 children. 4 children. Number 1, the infant son dies. All right. Number 2, Amnon dies because his brother kills him. We'll get to that in just a minute. Number 3, Absalom dies in rebellion. And number 4, Adonijah dies because he tries to take the throne away from Solomon. David pronounced his own judgment out of his own mouth. The man who has done this thing will pay 4-fold. He had 4 judgments passed upon him, and he lost 4 sons in the place of killing 1. Now, when people say it's an innocent look, it's an innocent flirtation, we're just kidding, we all know nobody would ever act on it, it's harmless. All right? Then let's go to somebody who has made that argument. It's no big deal. All right. Ask David if that relationship with that woman was worth it. Ask him while he's down on his face and his hands and his knees and he's begging God to spare the life of his infant child. Ask him if sin is no big deal. What about when David gets the news that one of his sons has raped his daughter? Now ask him if it's a big deal. What about when one son, Absalom, murders Amnon? Amnon who raped Tamar in the previous statement. Now, not only has one son defiled a daughter, now her brother has killed the other brother. Ask him if it's a big deal when his own son tries to kill him and take the throne from him in Absalom. Ask him if it's a big deal when Shimei is hurling cursings at him as he is fleeing from his son. And David can just look at him and go, because his mighty men say, I want to go take that guy's head off. And David says, no. Because what if God sent him? What if he's telling the truth? Ask David if it's a big deal when it's his turn to be on the other side and his wives are taken and defiled in the presence of other people. Ask him if it's a big deal when his closest advisor turns his back upon him, Ahithophel. By the way, you know who Ahithophel was? Bathsheba's grandfather. Ask him again when Absalom is killed and he goes up above the bedchamber and he says, Absalom, Absalom, my son Absalom, would to God that I had died for you. Ask him again as another son tries to overthrow the other son while he's on his deathbed. When David went looking and he saw that woman, it never entered his mind what that might cost him. Look what it cost him. Look what it cost him. Now, I want to close with 4 principal areas where sometimes this is a problem. The first of which is lying. We lie because we want to avoid an uncomfortable situation, or we want to make ourselves look better in the moment, and so, or we create then another lie to cover that lie, and we end up in this gigantic lie, this gigantic web of lies, because we just didn't want to feel uncomfortable one time. We just didn't want to tell the truth. And so now I've got lies that are so distorted, that are so far out there. I've got so many people deceived. It could take the rest of my life trying to untangle that web that I have put out, that I have woven. Maybe it all started when a text message came in from somebody and the spouse asked, "Who is that?" And instead of telling the truth, we just said, "Nobody." And then it turned into, "Well, who are you texting all the time?" "Nobody." "Why were you late getting home?" "Nothing, just got held up." "You said you've been at one place. Why are you dressed and why do you smell like you've been at another place?" What about the consumption of alcohol? And I will go ahead and tell you, before I even address this subject, I'm biased against alcohol. And that's before I ever open a Bible. I'm biased against it. I am absolutely 1,000% against it. My grandfather was a multimillionaire who died a pauper when my mother was 16 years old because he couldn't put down a bottle. I have 2 uncles that also, well, one passed away, the other was murdered. But they both struggled with alcoholism. So when people tell me that a drink is no big deal, listen, you're just barking up the wrong tree. People say, "But I'm not going to be that." And you know what? That's exactly what they said the first time they took it. Alcohol is one of the most dangerous things on this planet. I was sitting in, I don't remember, I think it was marriage and family therapy class. And I kind of obviously had a lot of questions about this. We were talking about substance abuse and family effects and things along that line in class. And so I asked our professor, who has counseled for many years, I asked him, I said, because, a lot of people say alcoholism is a disease. I don't subscribe to that theory. It's nuanced, and we don't have time to go into it, but I don't subscribe to that theory. So I asked him a question. And he said, here's the scary thing, not just about alcohol, but about addictive substances in general. He said, we're still studying the neuroscience of it all. But he said, the crazy thing is this. He said, one person can pick up and try alcohol one time and never touch it again, and never even want to touch it again. He said, another person can pick it up, touch it one time, and never even be able to control it the rest of their lives. He said, there's something in the mind, the neural pathways and things that are developed. There is something there. Basically, if I could summarize his answer, it was this. He said, when you take an addictive substance, even alcohol being included in that, he said, you're playing Russian roulette, basically. Because that could be the one for you. And there's no way for you to know. But that could be the one for you. And once it's got you, you'll spend the rest of your life trying to get that monkey off your back. Sometimes she says, I don't get that drunk and I don't really take it out on my family. You mean your family who is afraid to tell you the truth? You mean your 5-year-old daughter who when you look at her the next morning and say, Daddy wasn't too bad last night, are you, even though he jerked? Even though he jerked the chandelier out of the ceiling. She looks at Dad and says, no, you weren't bad last night, Dad. I've never met a person who struggled with alcoholism who ever thought they were going to be an alcoholic. It's just a beer at a game. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. But it'll take you, I promise you, it'll take you further than you want to go. And it'll keep you longer than you want to stay. And I promise you, it'll cost you more than you want to pay. And it won't just cost you. Now it starts costing the people around you. Now let's talk about your children who have anxiety attacks perpetually for the rest of their life because the person who's supposed to be an anchor in their life as their father has become an unpredictable monster. And for the rest of their lives, they do not feel stability because of that one man's inability to say no to something. What about pornography? Started just as a pop-up ad or a picture in a magazine. Or, the real danger today is this. Before there was some stigma that went along with viewing pornography. And by the way, increasing numbers. Women, the amount of women who are addicted to it is almost eclipsing that of men. But there used to be a stigma to it. If you wanted to partake in it, you'd have to go to a video store. You'd have to go to a place where you could purchase these things. Now you can access it anywhere. And we also have this idea in our minds that says, okay, well, look, streaming services, and by the way, streaming services, we have to be very cautious because they are very dangerous now. Do you want to know why people are moving to streaming services? Listen, do you know why people are moving to streaming services? Because if they put it on TV and they put it out on a video somewhere, they have to meet standards of morality. There is G, PG, PG-13, R, NC-17. There have to be standards. They have to withhold themselves. When they put it on a streaming service, everything is withheld from them. Nothing is withheld from them. They can show anything and everything and simply call it mature. Which, by the way, is the same rating a war movie gets. It's no big deal. I love my wife. It's no big deal. I love my husband. Wait until you look in the eyes of a spouse who's been betrayed by this. All these people I hear making light of these things, this is no big deal. I just want to jerk them by the hand and say, you come and sit with me. And first we're going to see him, and then we're going to have his children come in, and then we're going to talk to her, and then we're going to talk to him as to how this started innocently, and now he's got a monkey on his back that he wants to get rid of it, and he's struggling so hard, and he just can't seem to. Because literally what we know now in neuroscience, what that does to our minds literally reprograms synapses in our brains. The mind that views pornography is changed. That's not my research. That's neuroscientists that are specialized in that subject. Started as an innocent look, right? Or what about adulterous relationships? It's an innocent message from an old friend. It's a hug that lasts too long. Or it's people who are working together, and instead of talking to their spouse about their problems, they're talking to the person they work with about their problems. Listen to me. Your marital problems are no other person's business. If you really wanted those problems solved, you would go to somebody who could help you solve them. Your friend down the street who has never even studied relationships or relational development, they can't help you even if they want to. If you wanted it fixed, you could go get somebody who knows what they're doing. There is no reason to talk about it to somebody else. You get emotionally excited. You know, when you see this person, you start kind of dressing up a little more, and you kind of think about how you're responding to this person, and, you know, I hope they notice me, and I hope they say something to me today. It's like we're 5-year-old schoolgirls again. But that's how it starts. And now we've got two families who are facing the possibility of being broken apart, trying to sort out the consequences, trying to deal with the hurt, trying to keep our children away from it because we don't want them to know what's going on if they're at a young age, especially. It's no big deal. It's nothing. And I realize I'm over time, but you know what? We're not having church tonight, so 2 for 1. And I'm going to tell you, if you think, as I had one man try to convince me of one time, you know, it was just a one-time thing one night. Tell that to your wife. You look in her eyes and you watch the devastation. You try and get in her head where now she's going to wrestle for years. Was I not good enough? Was I not pretty enough? Was I not attentive enough? Was I not? The torture you have just set, the torturous path you have just set her on, you have no idea what you've just done. And people say, but you're talking about these big things. I'm not involved in those things. When those people first started, they weren't involved in them either. Now we can understand why Jesus says when he talks about sin, if your right eye offends you, pluck it out. If your right hand offends you, cut it off. What is he saying? Do what you have to do to kill sin at the source. Because sin is deceitful. It makes you get tunnel vision, and you focus only on getting that high and that moment of ecstasy, and you ignore the wonderful life that you have. And you sacrifice it on the altar of a few minutes of feeling good. Now, people say, that's pretty depressing. You're right, it is. But with the gospel, there's always good news. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, in verse 13, when David responds to Nathan, he says, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said to David, the Lord also has put away your sin. You shall not die. And people say, how is that fair? How could God let David off the hook for what he did? That's good news. Because actually, he didn't let David off the hook. He simply sent someone else to bear the penalty for it. That's part of what Romans is about, as we heard. Romans 3, God set forth Christ to be the propitiation, the appeasement for him to take the punishment. The only reason, listen, when God forgives sin, he's not like an old grandfather that says, oh, don't worry about it, honey. No, that sin's got to be punished. He just simply chose to take the punishment himself. That's forgiveness. You absorb the debt within yourself. And so the good news for anyone who is caught in these things, and if you are caught in these things, the one thing I would beg of you is to find someone who can help you. Find someone who can help you. Stop telling yourself it's not a big deal. Stop telling yourself it doesn't matter. Stop telling yourself it doesn't have consequences. Stop telling yourself you're the chosen one. You're going to get to do what you want to do, and you're not going to have to face consequences for it. You are. I beg you to do two things. First, run to Jesus and seek his forgiveness, because he's taken the penalty for your sin. Run to Jesus, and then find someone who can help you. If that's somebody in the local church, great. If it's somebody who it's their profession, great. But find someone who can help you. But the greatest problem you have is the sin that's on your record. And if you will bring it to Jesus, he'll take it away. There may be consequences that we still have to live with and deal with and sort out the rest of our lives, but worrying about the consequence of standing before God in judgment will no longer be a worry. Thanks be to God for a Savior like that. If we can help you this morning, let us know as we stand and sing this song.